I'm sitting here with my dear friend, Sidney Blumenthal. Sidney's got many hats that he's worn in his long and esteemed career, but briefly served as a senior aide to President Clinton in the White House. He's written numerous books, but while we're talking to him today, he is now on his fourth volume of the highly acclaimed political career of Abraham Lincoln. And I thought that we were in Chicago, we're at a convention, and I'm going to ask Sidney to tell us the story about the 1860 Republican convention that nominated Abraham Lincoln and probably was the start of saving the Constitution of the United States. So, Sidney, give us the kind of lead up to the convention, and what do we need to know about this monumental historic event that we should know more about as citizens?
Well, as Mark Twain said, history rhymes. And so let's start, and we'll do it in a concise little history. In 1857, and it's 2 days after the inauguration of that esteemed president, James Buchanan. And he has helped wire the Supreme Court. And they're going to come out with a decision from Chief Justice Roger Taney called the Dred Scott decision. Okay. And the Dred Scott decision, he says, black men have no rights, whites are bound to respect. And that slaves can be brought into free territory. This completely explodes politics and becomes the center of it. The Republican Party, out of the ruins of the Whig Party, has been created around the issue of opposition to expansion of slavery in the territories gained during the Mexican War and other territories. And this just sets dynamite to the whole issue. And just so we rhyme, let's think about the Dobbs decision. All right?
Sure.
Blows up our politics, and we are where we are. So what happens is Lincoln founds the Republican Party of Illinois. Each state party was founded separately. There was no, they were founded before the National Party came together. Lincoln was the founder of the Illinois Republican Party, a saga unto itself, in which he managed to isolate the know-nothings, the nativists, in order to bring in the Germans, who were the big immigrant group. And he runs for the Senate in 1858 against his longtime rival, Stephen A. Douglas, the sitting senator, who is long assumed to be the Democratic nominee for president and eventually president, except that what the Dred Scott decision and the divisive issue of slavery has interfered. Lincoln and Douglas debate up and down the state, and Douglas wins. He wins because he gerrymanders the state.
Wait. He won the debates? What did he win?
He lost the debates. Lincoln ran him down in the debates and completely wore him down and won the argument. These are different kind of debates that we have.
I understand.
And
we're going to have you back prior to the September 10th debate to talk about this. But
so what happens is Lincoln loses for the Senate, and Douglas wins by gerrymandering the state legislative districts because it's the legislature that votes for the senator, and Lincoln wins popular vote. So Lincoln thinks for a moment he's finished. But then he has another idea. And he tells his inner circle, his little war room, of the canny Illinois politicians and lawyers. And, he says, I may be an unknown, I may be the darkest of dark horses, but, maybe I should run for president. And they're a little
So he's a defeated
Senate candidate.
Didn't he have one term in the House?
He had one term in the House. However, the debates have made him nationally famous because they're printed in all the national newspapers, particularly the New York newspapers. So there's a meeting of the Republican National Committee in the Astor House Hotel on Lower Broadway to determine where the convention will be held for the Republican Party.
All right.
And each of these states gets a committeeman, and they send the committeeman from Illinois, and he says, you know, you are all self-interested. You all have candidates, and you can't have the convention in your state. We don't have a candidate from Illinois.
Of course, the whole time Lincoln was his candidate.
Of course, the whole time,
all right.
Lincoln, who is not announced, is their candidate in their back pocket.
I understand.
And the other committeeman says, well, that's a very convincing argument. We'll put the convention in Chicago, which is a booming town. And it has become, from a backwater village in a decade to the greatest railroad hub in the world. And it's an exploding economic powerhouse. And they build a new structure to hold the convention right here in Chicago, on the corner of State Street and Market Street, right where the Fulton Market is today. Very upscale market. And it's a huge block. It occupies the entire block. And so everyone assumes that the nominee of the Republican Party is going to be the senator.
That was the name of this edifice that they built.
Oh, it's a very good question, because the name of this convention hall is not the United Center. It's not named. Strangely enough, they did not have airlines then.
Right.
It is named the Wigwam, because that's where all the Indian chiefs are going to meet, in the Wigwam.
How could you imagine what the Dennehy culture would do with that today?
Yeah, they wouldn't be, you know.
Okay, that's the way.
Yeah,
we
they
had the
said
wigwam.
we're in the Wigwam on the site of such and such a tribe.
Right.
And so everyone's coming to the Wigwam in Chicago. Now, Lincoln is not present in Chicago. He's down in Springfield. He was up in Chicago, and this is an interesting footnote, the month before, and he was here for a huge case argued in the district court. And it was, what had happened was that they'd put up an obstacle on the Chicago River, and as a result, a lot of land was created, silted up on the north of the Chicago River,
Okay.
off what became Michigan Avenue. So what is now the Magnificent Mile is that land.
Wow.
And
That's
that didn't exist before. So this land suddenly existed, and the case is, since it's new land, did it belong to the man who had the real estate control on the other side before it existed? Or is it open land and can be bought? Lincoln represents, people say it's open. Biggest case. A lot of money involved.
Got it.
And Lincoln wins the case. And then he goes down to Springfield, because you're not supposed to be present at the convention if you're the nominee. It's considered inappropriate.
right.
So his men show up. David Davis, 300-pound man, who was the circuit court judge from Central Illinois, the maestro of the traveling attorneys that Lincoln was part of, going courthouse to courthouse for years. He's a former Whig power broker, and he's a master of politics. And he sets up in the hotel called the Tremont House, and he puts a big sign above the door, and it just reads, Illinois. And all the Lincoln crowd, their war room, is right in there where it says Illinois and Tremont House. And they spread out to all the other delegations. And as David Davis said, we did not sleep for 3 nights. And they were cutting deals right and left. So the presumptive nominee is William Seward, the senator from New York, the long-standing national figure.
Right.
He had not run in 1856, the first Republican convention that nominated a candidate, because He thought they'd lose. He'd wait for the next one. He'd be the candidate.
Right, it was going to come to him. It was
always his. He owned it.
Right.
He's waiting in Auburn, New York, in his mansion. He's got cannons set up that are going to boom when he receives the news from a messenger that he's been nominated.
Right.
His alter ego, Thurlow Weed, the Republican Party boss of New York State, who owns the Albany newspaper and controls the patronage and the lobbyists, takes a train from New York City. Long train filled with delegates and other people and packed with booze and piles of cash that Thurlow Weed is dispensing to the delegates. But meanwhile, David Davis and his people are cutting the deals with Indiana and, strangely enough, Pennsylvania.
Ooh. Oh, yeah. Pennsylvania wasn't going to go along with the program?
And they all thought, now, I don't know, they didn't think Seward was too old, but they thought he couldn't win. He might not be able to win because he had a lot of baggage, been around too long. They're looking for a new, fresh face.
Was there a little bit of an anti-New York sentiment in the rest of the country at this time? Had that developed by then?
There was a group of people who felt that Seward, while he was considered on the one hand too radical, was also considered too corrupt from New York because he was involved with a lot of boodle being dispensed to people through what was called the Albany lobby.
Right. But he wasn't near as corrupt as Douglas, was he?
No. Well, Douglas, of course, was corrupt and alcoholic and incredibly gifted as a politician.
Right.
So we are now in Chicago, and just a short distance from here are the Illinois Central tracks.
Okay.
There's a little diversion here.
Go through Carville.
Right, goes through Carville. It's the first major railroad built in the United States through the Illinois Central Act, engineered by Senator Stephen A. Douglas. He got it by making deals with the Southerners so that the federal government would assume the busted bonds of Texas. And all the financiers were involved, and they got paid off. Well, those tracks in Chicago and the right-of-way were owned by the land by Stephen A. Douglas. So he bought up all the land for the right-of-way before he passed the Illinois Central Act. And
first the land, then the legislation.
And then he became very wealthy. So Lincoln's here. Lincoln's in Springfield. His people are here. They're cutting the deals, and they get a telegram from Lincoln. Lincoln sends a telegram to David Davis. Says, "Make no deals on my name." Didn't want to cut any corrupt deals. So they have a meeting in the Illinois room of the Tremont House, and David Davis gathers the war room,
right,
and he reads the telegram, and then he says to them, "Lincoln ain't here." And they spread. He says, "You go to Pennsylvania, get to that delegation. You go to Indiana." Now, strangely enough, in the Lincoln cabinet, there was someone from Pennsylvania. There was someone from Indiana.
I don't know how it happened.
It happens, and so meanwhile, there's another guy named Jesse Fell.
Oh, tell us about this guy.
You're going to like Jesse Fell. He's a very close friend to Abraham Lincoln. He's the one who suggested that he debate Stephen A. Douglas. Jesse Fell is an abolitionist.
Let's spell his last name.
F-E-L-L, like
okay.
he fell down.
He fell. Okay.
And I'm going to tell you, you're going to be surprised at the end of this. He's the wealthiest man and creates the city of Normal, Illinois. Owns all the industry in the land, and creates the Illinois State University.
Oh, still exists.
And so he's a wealthy guy. He's an abolitionist, hates slavery. Years later, his great-grandson is Adlai Stevenson.
Ah, what a story.
Politics stays in the family.
Yeah,
so Jesse Fell, who is a wealthy guy, an abolitionist, person of the highest principles, takes charge of counterfeiting the convention passes.
Oh, God.
And so the New York delegation is all set, they're all liquored up, and they're ready to march in from the hotels into the conventions, and they discovered it's already packed.
Oh, there wasn't no room at the end.
And the Lincoln people were in there. First ballot, Seward's ahead. But then, second ballot, he starts disintegrating. And the third ballot, they're all going for Lincoln. All the deals come in, and they said that the sound inside the wigwam, according to a journalist, was like the squealing of all the hogs in the Cincinnati slaughterhouse at once. And some of Lincoln's supporters climbed on top of the wigwam. They put a cannon there and fired it. They almost fell off. The messenger rides up to Seward's house in Auburn, New York. He's assembled the entire town. He's waiting.
Right, for the good word.
For the good word that he's the nominee. He's the next president of the United States. And the rider comes closer and closer and closer, gives him the message, looks at it. He's wordless. He goes in the house. Silence. That's it. Seward is not the nominee. This, as he says at one point, this second-rate prairie lawyer has stolen the nomination from me, I who was entitled to it. But they had the fresh face. They had someone new. They had someone who represented the future. And this person was going to win because he also had the wind at his back, because he had the issues as well, particularly the issue of slavery, and particularly because the Supreme Court, in its everlasting hubris and arrogance, had made that Dred Scott decision and essentially, years later, was responsible for its own undoing of what it sought to do, and was responsible for the election of Abraham Lincoln.
So you had Dobbs back then, you had MAGA back then in terms of the know-nothings, you had every kind of treachery. Before I let you go, what happened to Seward after he lost?
That is a saga unto itself. Lincoln convinced him he should be Secretary of State. And Seward had his ideas that Lincoln would be the figurehead in the beginning.
Right.
Because he was just a country bumpkin, and he would be, as he called himself, the premier.
Reagan.
He was going to be the premier.
1980.
Yeah.
Remember that?
I do. And he had underestimated Lincoln, and it took him a while to understand that Lincoln was shrewd and canny and had a deep understanding of how things worked. And it took Lincoln a while, but through the great early crises that led to the firing on Fort Sumter and in the aftermath, Seward eventually comes to understand that Lincoln is, as Seward writes his wife, the best of us.
So one question before I let you go. If Seward would have been the nominee, would the Republicans have won in 18? What is your best guess? What would have happened to the best guess? Okay, but educated guess.
My guess is that Seward would have won. He was a much more divisive figure. He wanted to actually accommodate the South, and his idea was he would have given up Sumter. Unlike Lincoln. He didn't understand what was going on. He still had a sense of the old politics because he was, as history rhymes, a longtime product of the Senate. And he had spent decades with these people who had gone and created the Confederacy and thought he knew them. And he thought that what would happen is they'd realize the errors of their way and how foolish it was, and that the Confederacy couldn't stand on its own, and that they would come back. And all you had to do was just wait them out. That's what Seward thought. And that was complete foolishness of an adult in the room who believed in, quote, normal politics in an age when there was no normal politics.
Well, thank you very much for the incredible history. Just so you know, I get to talk to Scott on the phone every day, and I'm usually asked for like a 20-minute lecture on some subject, and he never fails to deliver. But Sidney, this was great, and we're going to talk about the Lincoln-Douglas debates after Labor Day as we approach what I believe is going to be a huge campaign event, and that's the date of 10 September. Because I think, Trump's going to have to debate. He cannot, I think the political cost of him backing out would be too great, and I think he kind of needs, in his mind, he'll figure he needs it. But the audience for this thing is going to be, to quote Trump, tremendous, because we had the debacle of June the 27th, and this is going to be kind of the first time you're going to look at these two very, very different people on stage. I think the visual is going to be compelling. I think this is going to be one of the more consequential presidential debates. I really do.
Decisive, and I'm looking forward to returning with you, James. Always a pleasure, and we'll talk about the great debates before the great debate.
Well, thank you, our Politicon people, and we'll continue history lessons with Sidney Blumenthal. Thank you very much, Sidney. It's great educational material.
Thank you, James.